Have you ever wondered why, despite all the global criticism, America never abandons Israel? It seems like their bond, this Romeo and Juliet love story, will be remembered by the entire world. But this relationship wasn't always so deep. In fact, there was a time when Jews and Christians intensely disliked each other. This whole story begins with a single person, Jesus Christ. About 2000 years ago, when all the Jews lived in the region of Palestine, they held no power. Palestine was controlled by a major superpower, the Roman Empire, who treated the Jews like slaves and inflicted great cruelty upon them. Seeing this oppression, Jewish scholars understood that all the signs mentioned in their holy book, the Torah, had been fulfilled, and their Messiah was about to come to save the Jews. These scholars believed that when the Messiah arrived, he would first greet them and become their leader. But that's not what happened at all. Jesus began gathering people and openly speaking out against the Jewish scholars, explaining to the people that their religion was in danger because of these scholars. Because of these very actions, the Jewish scholars began to hate him and conspired with the Roman Empire to have Jesus executed. The Jewish scholars put immense pressure on the Roman Empire to pass a death sentence on Jesus. The Roman governor told them, "Fine, we will pass the death sentence on this man. But remember, his blood will be on you Jews, not on any Roman." To this, the Jews replied, "Don't worry, his blood will be on us and our generations to come." Jesus escaped their plot, but the Jews could not live peacefully in Palestine for long after his departure. Soon after Jesus left, a massive war broke out between the Roman Empire and the Jews, in which the Roman Empire completely crushed the Jews. They destroyed all the Jewish holy sites in Jerusalem and permanently expelled all the Jews from Palestine, an event known as the diaspora. For the next 500 years, every Jew in the world wished for a miracle to return to Palestine. And that is exactly what happened. 500 years after the expulsion of the Jews from Palestine, a new state, the state of Medina, the Islamic Caliphate, was established. This Muslim Caliphate spread rapidly, and during the time of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Muslims broke the power of the Roman Empire and conquered Palestine and Jerusalem. Before surrendering to the Muslims, the Christians of the Roman Empire made only one condition to Hazrat Umar, that he must not allow the Jews to return here under any circumstances. But Hazrat Umar did not heed their demand and allowed the Jews to return and settle in Jerusalem. Following this order by Hazrat Umar, for the next 400 years, Jews and Muslims were very good friends with each other, and Christians were their common enemy. But after 400 years, Palestine was taken from the hands of the Muslims once again. How? This happened through a new pope in Europe, Pope Urban, who was very dangerous. He ordered the people and kings of Europe to fight a war, the Crusades, against the Muslims to retake their holy city of Jerusalem. The Christians of Europe joined forces and attacked the Muslims. However, at that time, the Muslims were so preoccupied with their own luxuries and internal conflicts that they could not fight against this wave of crusaders. Therefore, the Christians easily occupied all of Palestine and started killing Muslims mercilessly. It is said that at one time there was no space to put a foot down in the Al-Aqsa Mosque because it was filled with the bodies of Muslims. The war of the Christians was with the Muslims, but they hated the Jews even more than the Muslims. because it was the Jews who had plotted to kill their God, Jesus Christ, many years ago. So, while killing Muslims, the Christians also started chasing the Jews. Jewish children and women fled from the Crusaders and hid in their synagogues. And as soon as the Crusader soldiers found out, they set fire to these buildings and burned thousands of Jews alive. For the next 90 years, the Muslims could not reconquer Palestine. Finally, a new leader of the Muslims emerged, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. He reunited the Muslims of the world and attacked Palestine once more. In this attack, all the Jews of the world fully supported Salahuddin Ayyubi. Even the world's greatest Jewish scholar, Maimonides, was part of Salahuddin Ayyubi's army and served as his personal doctor. Salahuddin, of course, conquered Palestine again, and thus Muslims and Jews once again lived together in peace and tranquility, not only in Palestine, but wherever Muslims ruled. Jews lived a life of great respect and always tried to stay away from Christians. The most powerful Jews in the world were not in Palestine at the time, but in another Muslim-ruled territory, Al-Andalus, Spain. Spain was once the wealthiest and most powerful region under Muslim rule for 800 years. It was impossible to take Spain from the Muslims. But after 800 years, the Christian leaders of Europe united once again, attacked the Muslims of Spain, and finally took all of Spain from them. After conquering Al-Andalus, the Christian leaders gave the Muslims and Jews only two options: either abandon your religion and convert to Christianity or leave Spain forever. Of course, no one was going to abandon their religion, so they were all confused about where to go after leaving Spain. Seeing this, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the time, Bayezid II, invited the Muslims and Jews to leave Spain and come to the Ottoman Empire, where the Sultan would take good care of them. Here, a critical question arises. If the Muslims and Jews of the world were such good friends until only 500 years ago, what happened in between that caused the Jews and Christians to join forces and become enemies of the Muslims? The actual story is very interesting. When the Jews started slowly moving away from Muslim areas towards Europe, the Christians in Europe still hated the Jews intensely. Therefore, to keep them in check, the Christians of Europe made a law that Jews could live in Europe, but could not buy land in Europe, and were also told to stay away from European politics and the military. So, naturally, the Jews had only one job left in Europe: business. All the Jews of Europe began to become big traders and businessmen. In this way, they gradually accumulated a lot of money. But the problem now was that they could not buy any land with all that money, while the Christians' money was all spent on buying land. Slowly, a situation arose in Europe where all the Christians' money was tied up in land. So, they had no cash, and on the other hand, the Jews could not buy any land in Europe, so they had a lot of cash on hand. This is where the Christians started taking loans from the Jews on interest. Taking loans on interest is also forbidden in the Jewish religion, but only from each other. With people of other religion, they could do anything. Therefore, the Jews started giving loans to the Christians of Europe on interest generously. It got to the point where the major kings of Europe started taking loans from the Jews. Ultimately, the Jews made so much money from this interest system that they started building small banks in every city of Europe. But just when the Jews were at the peak of their power in Europe, a major problem occurred. When a European king could not repay his debt to the Jews, he would kill all the Jews in his region and expel them, which was greatly disrupting the Jewish business. So now, the Jews started thinking that instead of these small banks, they needed a centralized international bank. And that's what happened. A powerful Jew from Germany created the world's first international bank, and his name was Mayer Rothschild. The Rothschild Bank became so powerful within a few years that he sent his 5 sons to every major city in Europe, ordering them to go to every capital city and establish the biggest bank there. This was the world's first international bank, and the advantage was that, being in every major city in Europe, no king in Europe could destroy their business, because whenever one brother was weakened, all the other brothers would unite to save him. The Rothschild family had so much money that the Spanish, French, and British empires were all running on their money at that time. But the Rothschild family gained their real power when a major war broke out in Europe. This war was being led by a great king of France, Napoleon. Napoleon's power was spreading very rapidly throughout Europe, but Napoleon suffered the biggest loss when the 5 Rothschild brothers supported the British Empire instead of Napoleon. After which, the British Empire defeated Napoleon with the Rothschild family's money. Now, the Jews were at the peak of their power in Europe. All the major jobs in Europe were held by Jews. The most educated people in Europe were Jews, and the control of the entire European economy was in the hands of the Jews. So, now, the Jews slowly started thinking that 2000 years ago we were weak, which is why the Roman Empire expelled us from Palestine, but now we will go back and settle in Palestine because of our power. And this is where secret Zionism began for the first time in the world. About 40,000 Jews from all over the world started secretly migrating to Palestine and began buying Palestinian land from the poor Arabs at double and triple the price. The Rothschild family was providing the greatest help to the Jews in buying these lands. The Jews were buying only empty and barren lands in Palestine. Therefore, the Arabs of Palestine were happily selling these lands to the Jews for triple the price. The Jews bought their largest piece of land in Palestine in Ahuzat Bait, which was a completely empty and barren area. But today, that empty area is called Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, which is one of the most advanced cities in the world. Seeing this, even more Jews from all over the world started settling in Palestine, after which the Jews started newspapers, radio, and TV shows in Palestine in their Hebrew language. And thus, finally, after 2000 years, the Hebrew language was heard again on the land of Palestine. Until now, the Jews were doing all this alone, but this is where they found their best friend in the world, the evangelical Christians of America. Suddenly, a book was written in America overnight, Jesus is Coming, which carried a huge message for the Christians of the world. My Christian brothers, wake up, because Jesus is coming back to the world very soon, and Jesus will only return when the Jews have their own country in Palestine. This book broke all records in America, selling millions of copies upon publication, and the idea became firmly entrenched in the minds of all American Christians that Jesus will only return when Israel has its own country in Palestine. Since the Zionists now had the support of the American public, they finally came out into the open and held their first meeting in Switzerland, in which the leader of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, stood before the world and said, I am going to say something today that I know you will all laugh at. In 50 years from today, the Jews will have their own country in Palestine after 2000 years. This was an impossible thing for the Jews, but Theodore said, "Remember, exactly 50 years from today, my prediction will come true." This was such an incredible prediction that the State of Israel was established exactly 50 years after this meeting. They were so committed to their mission that they even unveiled the flag of Israel to the public for the first time at the same meeting. Soon after this meeting, Theodore sent two people to Palestine to secretly report on the situation in Jerusalem. They sent a secret message back to Theodore from Jerusalem. "The bride, Jerusalem, is very beautiful. But the problem is, she is someone else's wife, because Palestine was ruled not by someone else, but by the Ottoman Caliphate at the time, and its Caliph, Sultan Abdul Hamid II, was a very strict man. Therefore, Theodore Herzl went straight to meet the Ottoman Caliph and offered him a deal. We Zionists will pay off a huge debt of the Ottoman Empire if Sultan Abdul Hamid gives the territory of Palestine to the Jews." Sultan Abdul Hamid replied to Theodore, "Even if you tear my body into pieces, I will never hand over Palestine to you people. Never." And this is where the fight between the Ottoman Empire and the Zionists began. Now, the Zionists went straight to their old friend, the British Empire, begging for their country. Since it was impossible to create a Jewish state in Palestine, the British Empire gave the Zionists two alternatives. "You people leave Palestine and choose any region between Uganda or Argentina and build your country there." But the Jews replied, "Just as the French live in France and the English live in England, the Jews will also live in only one place in the world, Palestine." All the Zionists of the world started trying to find a way to dismantle the Ottoman Empire. And that is what happened. Soon after, the biggest war in the world started, World War I. And naturally, as soon as World War I began, the British Empire once again looked to their old friends, the Rothschild family, for help, and to please them, the British Empire promised the Rothschild family, "If we take Palestine from the Ottoman Caliphate under the pretext of this world war, we will create a new country for you, Israel, there." After which, Jews all over the world stood with the British Empire, and the British Empire easily took Palestine from the Ottoman Caliphate. And after conquering the holy city of Jerusalem, the foreign minister of the British Empire, Arthur Balfour, sent a letter to the most powerful Jew in the world, Walter Rothschild, in which he clearly stated that the British Empire will use its full power to try and establish the country of Israel. Now, the problem was that when the British Empire announced the formation of the State of Israel in 1917, only 10% of the population in Palestine was Jewish, and the remaining 90% were Muslim. From this, Rothschild and the other Zionists understood that if they wanted to establish the State of Israel, they would have to increase their population in Palestine. Therefore, after World War I, Jews from all over the world started migrating rapidly towards Palestine, and the Jewish population in Palestine began to increase again quickly. When World War I ended, only 10% of Palestine was Jewish, but after World War II ended, over 30% of the population was Jewish. However, the British Empire suffered so much loss in this war that they could no longer manage their vast empire, which is why major colonies like India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka started gaining independence from the British Empire. Seeing this, the Zionists in Palestine started demanding of the British Empire, "Now fulfill your promise and establish a Jewish state here." But the problem was that only 30% of Palestine was Jewish and the rest were all Muslims. Due to this, the British Empire was not ready to establish the state of Israel so quickly. Seeing this, the Jews and Zionists of Palestine turned against their old friend, the British Empire, and for the first time, the Zionists started attacking the British Empire itself. The situation was now that Muslims and Jews were all fighting against the British Empire. Therefore, the British Empire, finally fed up, presented the issue of Palestine to the United Nations and said, "Now you decide what should happen with Palestine." Following this, the UN made the most stupid decision in its history. It was decided that Palestine would be divided into three parts. Asterisk. The largest part of Palestine, 55% of the territory, would be given to the Jews, who were only 33% of the population. Asterisk. And 66% of the Muslims of Palestine would be given the smaller 45% of the territory. Asterisk. And Jerusalem would be made an international city. This is like dividing a cake among 10 people, giving half the cake to 3 people and the other half to the remaining 7 people, which was a very unfair decision. When the UN presented this decision to the Zionists and the Muslim Committee in Palestine, of course, the Jews celebrated this decision greatly, but the Muslim Committee of Palestine completely rejected the UN plan. As soon as the Muslims rejected the UN plan, the leader of the Zionists suddenly appeared on Rothschild Street in Tel Aviv and said, "Because of the stubbornness of the Muslims, we announce today that not half of Palestine, but all of Palestine is ours." And with that, David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of Israel. He made this announcement beneath a large picture of his Zionist leader, Herzl, who had said exactly 50 years ago that the state of Israel would be formed in the world 50 years from that day. And that is exactly what happened. Just 11 minutes after Israel's independence, the superpower America recognized the country of Israel, after which the Soviet Union and others followed suit, among which there was only one Islamic country that recognized Israel, Reza Shah's Iran. Just one day after all the Jews of Israel were celebrating their independence, 5 Arab countries attacked Israel. But it was of no use. Israel crushed these large Arab countries with the help of America and Britain. In fact, the size of Israel grew even larger from this war, and the territory that the UN had promised to the Muslims was also taken from them. The only problem for Israel in Palestine was that the Muslim population was still double that of the Jews. Therefore, the founders of Israel made it their first priority to permanently expel the Palestinians who had been living there for thousands of years. Israel destroyed major Palestinian cities and 500 villages, and it is said that those Muslims who refused to leave Palestine after Israel's atrocities were killed by Israel mixing poison in their water wells and pipes. And in this way, 800,000 Palestinian Muslims left Palestine forever in a single year. And to fill the empty homes of these Palestinians, 700,000 Jews came to Israel from all over the world. This increased the Jewish population in Palestine to 60 to 70%. And to this day, Israel uses the same strategy repeatedly. Every few years, Israel creates some pretext or another to expel the Palestinians from Palestine, so that the name and trace of Muslims are forever erased from Palestine, and only the Jewish Zionists rule here.